A fire is burning in the United States of America, a wildfire spreading across the great campuses of the best universities in that country. A fire has begun on the ground in Rafah, where the Israeli invasion force has moved its heavy tanks and artillery to the edge of a tent city with 1.6 million people living on the ground, and now prey to perhaps the worst massacre since the Second World War. Fire appears to have been narrowly averted in the confrontation between the apartheid state of Israel and its great adversary, the Islamic Republic of Iran, which continues to demand an end to the massacre of the people in Gaza, an end to the occupation of the Palestinian territories, and the establishment of a state of freedom for the people of that country. They see it as their religious and political duty to do so. And, as is now clear, they have the wherewithal. Meanwhile, the Western governments continue to blame Iran for standing up to the apartheid state's aggression, just as they blame the people of Yemen for trying to apply their own economic sanctions on apartheid state trade routes in the Red Sea. The Western governments are now utterly bankrupted. Joe Biden has just sent the National Guard into the campuses of NYU, of Columbia University, of Yale University, for goodness sake. It's beginning to look like 1968, at the height of the Vietnam War, when another Democratic Party president, warmonger, genocider, President Lyndon Johnson, sent the National Guard onto the campuses of America, killing many students at Kent State University, maiming and wounding uncountable numbers more, leading up to the Democratic Party convention in Chicago under the Democratic tyrant mayor Richard Daley. The whole world is watching. The hundreds of thousands of protesters in Chicago chanted, and so they were, as the goons, the thugs of the Democratic Party clubbed the young protesters to the ground. The whole world was watching. The people of Vietnam were watching. They were able to see that millions of Americans rejected the role of their own government in committing mass murder in Vietnam. The same thing is happening in the Arab and wider Muslim world right now. Everyone can see that in London, that in New York and Washington, that across the Western world, the governments committing the crimes against the Palestinian people are almost entirely bereft of their own public's support. We'll be talking about all of this on Have It Out with Galloway. And the good news is some of you can join in. Chay Bowes is a political correspondent and analyst with an MA in strategic studies. He co-founded a political news website called The Ditch, which focuses on investigative journalism in Ireland. On 29 June 2023, he addressed the UN Security Council, discussing the dangers of perpetual escalation by NATO in Ukraine. Chay Bowes continues his work as a geopolitical analyst of the first rank and a commentator, wry and witty. He contributes to RT and maintains a social media presence which is vibrant indeed. I'm glad to say he joins me now from Moscow. Chay, welcome. Been a while since we talked. In my introduction there, I was talking about the, well, let's call it febrile atmosphere in many of the Western countries that are most committed to confrontation with Russia and Ukraine, with the Palestinians in Gaza, and so on. That could be quite a fundamental struggle, don't you think?
Yes, George, and thanks for asking me to contribute today, and congratulations to you as well on your recent victory, which reflects a huge upsurge in dismay and disgust with the political elites in the UK. And well done to the people of Rochdale too. They have a fearsome advocate for truth and justice now in the mother of all parliaments. So well done to you and to them.
Thank you.
And God bless you all. So your point regarding the febrile atmosphere, of course, anybody who studied the Western hegemonist, post-imperial, post-colonial political machine, which dominates the world through the dominance of the dollar, anybody who understands that machine, and there's no people better educated in it than the people of Iran and the people of Russia and the people of South America, the people of post-colonial Africa. Anyone who understands that realizes that much of this febrile activity is predicated on fear. It's all about fear. We need fear in the West to perpetuate and grease the wheels of an exceptionally profitable military-industrial complex, of which NATO is an energetic salesperson, essentially. An empire-building, society-building organization, not really a military defensive alliance, because if it was a defensive alliance, which was built, we are told, to prevent the proliferation of communism from the East and from Russia, when the Soviet Union collapsed and disappeared in 1991, then obviously, by default, you would imagine that NATO would have disappeared as the Warsaw Pact, its counterpart, disappeared. The threat which formed the raison d'etre, if you like, for the existence of NATO disappeared. But NATO didn't disappear. It's grown. It's become a political golden cow, if you like, for the elites which dominate the parliaments in Britain, in the United States, in the political system, which is so closely aligned to this militant fear-mongering. It's been previously, it's been the Black African, it's been the Red Indian, it's been the Muslim, it's been the Irish, it's been the Scots, and it's all predicated on fear. And now the latest darling of the fear-mongers, if you like, are, of course, Hamas, the Iranians, who apparently are controlling them, which there's no evidence of that whatsoever, and, of course, the Russians in the background. So all of this mantra, as you say, this febrile energy dedicated to far-off places and different religion, different creed, the dangerous Russians coming down from the steppe to eat your babies, the barbaric Muslim who's going to take over Europe and destroy our culture, steal our women and overtake our culture. This fantasy narrative of fear is what drives a political lead in the West, which is grossly failing its people. And it's always advantageous for people like Boris Johnson, when he's in serious political trouble in the United Kingdom, to look towards Kiev, to establish himself as some sort of political knight in shining armor, when he actually scuppered peace talks, which would have ended this conflict 3 weeks after it started, essentially. I was at a press conference where Sergei Lavrov, this exceptionally well equipped, if you like, man, 50 years as a senior diplomat, very well educated, outlined how the British and the Americans had pulled Ukraine from the negotiating table in 3 weeks after the Russian military intervention in 2022. Similarly, I believe this latest round of fear-mongering about Iran and the vilification of Iran for defending itself and responding militarily against, let's say, absolutely categorically military targets, when Iran responded to Israel's brutal attack in contravention of all international law, attacking a compound in an embassy in a third country and killing several senior officials. I actually wrote about this yesterday and suggested if the United States embassy in Kiev was targeted by a Russian missile and 7 senior American officials, including 2 generals, were killed by the Russians because they alleged they were operating a proxy war from the Kiev embassy against Russian assets and soldiers and troops, which is indeed the case. I would imagine the American response would have been far more potent and wide-ranging, economic, cultural, maybe the start of the Third World War. So the a la carte application of a high-handed morality by the post-colonial elites, by the United Kingdom, by the United States, which in some ways is less aggressive towards Russia and to the Middle East than London. London seems to be the engine of a lot of this aggression and this passive aggression and this need to deflect from the grossly difficult situation in the United Kingdom. One of the only growth areas in the United Kingdom are food banks, but it's far easier to deflect and say the Russians are coming in 5 years' time, they're going to invade NATO. Absolutely baseless, ludicrous fear-mongering. Again, Iran is, of course, the focus of all of this vehement and nihilistic fear-mongering to deflect from a huge amount of domestic political failure, George. And this is the interesting thing. And the cultivation by the Western client media as well of this willful ignorance among the population, a simplistic moral drive-through narrative, much like drive-through food. It's very bad for you, but it's very tasty. It's very easy to eat and consume. And the Western media willfully peddles this simplistic narrative about Iran. They don't want to tell people that in 1954, the democratically elected government of Iran was overthrown by the British, the Americans, and British Petroleum. Mohammad Masadi brutally removed from power, his reputation and his political career, and in the end, his life destroyed by a deployed lie against him. His crime, wanting to nationalize the oil wealth, the immense oil wealth of Iran. Similarly, they don't want to tell you about the Sèvres Protocol, where Israel, Britain, and France met to plot how to destroy Egypt, how to invade and steal Suez. The crime again, Gamal Abdel Nasser, this great Arab leader, a threat to the Western hegemonists and post-colonial elites. He wanted to nationalize the Suez Canal. This was never going to be allowed to happen. So I think our viewers and those listening and watching what's happening should understand that in the background, anyone who believes that there isn't a very malevolent, cohesive movement to, portray non-enemies as enemies, there's the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And the Western powers have shown again and again and again, Operation Mockingbird, Operation Red Sox, you can freely investigate the sincerity of how energetically Western powers will seek to undermine, vilify, demonize an apparent enemy. And the people of Iran, the people of Russia aren't the enemies of the people of the West. They're working people just like you and me. I live among them here. I have many Iranian friends. I've met the Iranian foreign minister recently, and he displayed an immense knowledge, Mr. Abdullahian. He had an immense knowledge of Irish history and a huge warmth and understanding of our struggles against imperialism, as you do. So the idea that these essentially unelected bureaucrats in the EU, an American political machine, which is so intimately related to the military-industrial complex, $61 billion, we're told, a day ago, essentially, is going to be dispatched to Ukraine. Ukraine has had nearly $300 billion already given to it by the international community, and all that's delivered is nearly 500,000 dead people. So unfortunately, tragically, a country destroyed, a country which was eminently corrupt prior to the acceleration of the conflict, and now is even more corrupt. A president elected on the premise of bringing peace and tackling corruption. By over 70% of the population in Ukraine elected Volodymyr Zelensky to bring peace, bring accommodation, and tackle corruption. Both he has failed on. We have a brutal and terrible, unnecessary war, and we have massive corruption. Similarly, I believe that when it comes to Iran and the conflict in the Middle East, if you can call it a conflict. I refuse to call what Israel is doing in Gaza a war against Hamas. It's a war against the civilian population. It's a genocide. It's willful mass murder. And let's be absolutely unequivocal about that. Nobody can call what is happening a war. That war could not happen without the assistance, both financial and the political cover and defense of the Israeli state, this Zionist entity, which is massacring untold numbers of innocent civilians and children, that could not function without the assistance, political cover and defense of the United States. And the United States, similarly, is the engine of the conflict in Ukraine, intimately involved in the 2014 Maidan coup d'etat, which removed a democratically elected president, Viktor Yanukovych. So when the West decides it wants to deploy its morality, much like David Cameron on Sky News saying, when he was asked by Kay Burley, what would the United Kingdom do if one of its embassies was destroyed? And he basically said, oh, we would react in a very strong way. A great question from her. But this is the a la carte morality of the West. It applies also to the media and how they refer to the children, the families who've been torn to pieces by American ordnance, dropped by American planes with American money, not only in Gaza, but this happened in Vietnam, this happened in Syria, in Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq. The world seems to be able to morally look the other way when these people are either Muslim, brown, the wrong color. When it comes to Ukraine, Europe opens its arms to the blonde-haired, blue-eyed victims of this war, because this is a politically deployed necessity from the EU and from the Anglosphere, this very, very hawkish Anglosphere, which is fed in turn by a political elite which is intimately related to the greasy nexus of the military-industrial complex. Lloyd Austin, the American Secretary of Defense, is essentially a board member on one of the biggest weapons manufacturers, Raytheon, on Earth, which is making grotesque profits as human beings are torn to pieces using these weapons. It's an absolutely repulsive and, as you say, febrile position we're in globally. But as you say, as in Vietnam and as in most cases, it's people. And the people of Rochdale spoke. They elected you, thank God, to represent them. We've had people rejecting the NATO narrative in Europe, Robert Fico elected. We've had, we have hope. We have hope through the people. And the good people of the United States are making their voices heard. The good people of Ireland, Scotland, the UK. We have to hope that people power will have an impact against this grotesque war machine. If there was no profit, George, and the intimate relationship between profit, the elites, and the deployment of war as a tool of diplomacy, which is the expert speciality of the United Kingdom and the United States. And the history books tells us that. If there was no profit in that, either for this elite or for the grimy profit mongers who profit so much from it, there would be no war. There would be no war. But unfortunately,
well, look,
there is...
That's the best answer anyone has ever given to any question I have ever asked. May it live long and travel far. I've only time, therefore, to ask you one more thing, and it's, in a sense, a philosophical question. Are we headed for a new world order, or are we headed to a third world war?
Well, George, I think we're already in a new world order. And I see that here in Russia. I see it when I travel to the post-Soviet republics. I go to Kazan, to the Islamic Economic Forum, such vibrancy, people from Afghanistan, from all across the Islamic world. I did a webinar with young journalism students yesterday or 2 days ago. Incredible, from India, Pakistan, people talking, people realizing that the age of divide and conquer is over and the age of unite and prosper is here. It is here. It's here with things like BRICS. And one tragic reality that has been realized by all human feeling people that cannot accept that killing children in volumes in the thousands, something so reprehensible. But also remember something that Madeleine Albright suggested was worth it during the Iraq conflict, when it was mentioned that hundreds of thousands of children had died. She said it was worth it. We think it's worth it. The vast majority of human beings, regardless of color, creed, religion, race, or political allegiance, know and understand that it's never okay to massacre children, women, civilians fleeing, people trying to feed them, to target them and kill them. This is brutally evil, and it is recognized by the vast majority of people. But one thing, dare I say it, that will come from this display of moral ambiguity and evil, which I believe what's happening in Gaza it's a display of evil unprecedented, as you say, since the Second World War. And as again, even more shockingly, by who we are told are the arbiters and defenders of freedom, liberty, and democracy globally, the United States and Britain, are the sponsors, defenders, and facilitators of this madness and this mass murder. And one thing that is displayed to people is that any semblance of moral authority or dignity that these two failing dominant hegemons, if you like, had, is now utterly dispelled. And people are looking to the global south. They're looking to alliance, friendship. They're looking to China, to Russia. They're looking to the global south, to Africa. And the French are being chased out of Africa. We're starting to see things change. And the dominance of the dollar, which is the lubricant on this machine of dysfunction that has impoverished so many people, the grip the dollar has is also under some threat. It will be some time, I think. But again, I think we're already in a new world order, George. And I think the only people that want the Third World War are the people that see escalation and perpetual escalation as the only avenue of forward motion, because everything else would be their acceptance that they have been complicit in genocide, complicit in beginning wars for the most nefarious and unjust reasons. And their political careers, pensions, and position in this machine of dysfunction are so important to them, they would probably rather see escalation. But I think people will reject that.
Chay Bowes, you and I definitely kissed the same Blarney Stone, in my case, as a very young boy. Thank you very much for that spellbinding oration and answer to the big questions of the day. Now, the one thing that's different with the program I'm now doing, Have It Out with Galloway, is that you get to have your say up here on this video wall. So first up from London, Julian Malins, King's Counsel. Julian, an honor to have you here. What would you like to say?
Well, George, I won't give you an exegesis on history and world affairs like your last distinguished guest, as I have not kissed the Blarney Stone. But I would like, as we are allowed, I think, on this podcast, to challenge you, challenge you on one aspect of your beliefs. I think you believe that religious people are good people, and that if you are a bad person, you cannot be a religious person. I profoundly disagree with that. If you take the foreign and domestic policy of the current Israeli cabinet, we know, because Netanyahu told us this when he referred to the Palestinians as Amalekites, that the policy of the Israeli government is based upon the 15th chapter of the first book of Samuel. If that is not religious, I think the word religion has lost all meaning. George, they are killing for their God. Now, you have previously said Well, it's not that, it's land. I have been all over what I call the Holy Land, and it is hardly the Vale of Evesham, which for your international viewers is considered one of the most productive and fertile parts of England. When you come over the hill and look at the Holy Land, you don't say to yourself, wow, this is a wonderful piece of territory, this is what we want. What the children of Israel said, and are still saying, is that this territory is given to us by God. Now, that is a religious precept. And my point, which I wish to put to you, George, is that religious people can be bad people as well as religious people being good people. So over to you.
Very powerfully and eloquently put, as one would expect from you and your eminent reputation. If they were religious people, sir, they would be following the 10 Commandments. If they followed the 10 Commandments, they would not be bad people. If they did not kill, if they did not covet their neighbor's house, land, wife, ox, if they did not lie, if they did honor their own mother and father and other people's mother and father, if they did follow the commandments of God, they would not be bad people. If they are acting as bad people, ipso facto, they are in defiance of the commandments. That's my, if you like, religio-philosophical position. We've got Father Frank Galloway present. He'll correct me, albeit from a Protestant standpoint, if I am wrong. But it is my position that these Zionists, and there are others in Ukraine, for example, in the ultra-nationalist, even fascist formations in Ukraine, are using religion, the iconography of religion, the dictionary of religion to justify something quite different. And I do believe that the Holy Land is A, more beautiful than you allow, B, more strategically and beautifully placed than you allow. But the main driver of the crime against the Palestinian people was nationalism. It was colonialism. None of these are religious ideas. Even if you read the coverage of the Congress of Basel, B-A-S-L-E, which was the foundation Congress of the Zionist movement, the word colonize and colony is present in virtually every paragraph of the coverage of that event. And they were ready to colonize and make a colony in any number of different countries. And you know this as a brilliant man. They sued the British government repeatedly, beseeched them for Uganda, for example, for the Seychelles, as another example, for Patagonia in Argentina. They were ready to, wanted to make a colony and colonize any number of lands belonging to other people. It was only when that Zionist movement fastened on the colonization of Palestine, where a number of Jews, many Christians, and a lot of Muslims were already living in harmony, more or less perfect harmony, certainly more harmony than is to be found in the Vale of Esher. And it was only then that they post facto invented the religious justification for their colony. In fact, sir, every single leader of the Zionist movement to whom Mr. Balfour promised the land of Palestine was himself an atheist, an avowed atheist. So they didn't believe in God, but later claimed that God promised them Palestine. Julian, thank you for getting me off to that fighting start. Mudassar Mahmoud is in Scotland, my own territory, in Livingston. Mudassar, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Thank you very much for having me, George, and congratulations on your crushing win in Rochdale. May you prosper in the in Parliament. I've seen you on Parliament a few times, right? Yeah, and you know, I have to say you're kind of on your own out there, aren't you? To be honest with you, so good luck to you, and hopefully
I'm Daniel in the Lion's Den, and I wish it were otherwise, but I'm ready.
Yeah. Okay, leaving just staying with the UK and staying with the USA as well a little bit, like we all know that the Zionist lobby, the Zionist ideology is all over everywhere. They control basically everything, right down to the leaders and right down to everywhere. Well, what we can boycott, you know, stuff like that. They're everywhere. How do you think? What would you think? What would it take to defeat? And what would the Zionist ideology? And what would it take the leaders of the world, right, to want to stand up and say, you know what, we've had enough of this. Enough is enough. And would it take civil war?
Well, if the leaders of the Western world, because the leaders of the rest of the world already know the truth here, by and large, if the leaders don't change their attitude, we'll have to change our leaders. And if we are fortunate enough, as you and I are, to live in a country where that is possible, without a drop of blood being shed, without a broken window being sustained, by simply putting an X on a piece of paper, then we must do it. If we don't do it, then we are responsible for the government that we have. You get the government that you vote for, or you get the opposition that you failed to vote for. So I don't believe that any kind of violence or problem or trouble is necessary in your country and mine. There are other countries where, of course, no such right exists. And even in your country, mine, and in the United States, that which purports to be a democracy very quickly changes, morphs into something else. It's a democratic right to peacefully protest, but as the students of NYU, Columbia, and Yale, and many others are finding out right this minute, if you use that right to challenge the policy of the United States with regard to Israel-Palestine, then you are going to have batons on your head, pepper spray in your lungs. So we must demonstrate, we must boycott, and we must vote out the politicians who brought us to this sorry pass. Let me go to Imran Ali Kaki in Dar es Salaam, the House of Peace in Tanzania. Imran Ali, welcome to the show.
Good morning, sir. It's such an honor to be able to ask a question at your show, and I thank you and your team for giving me this opportunity. So since our topic is the changing world order or the world order, I was thinking, how will India's positioning in BRICS on one end and anti-Muslim and US support on the other end affect the changing world order?
It's a great question, a very big one. There is, of course, an election now going on in India. at election times. Leaders like Prime Minister Modi stoop to stirring up their base, in his case, a Hindu nationalist base. And his comments yesterday calling the 14% of India's population who are Muslim infiltrators in the country is dangerous indeed. But we must hope that it is mere election rhetoric and not something else. There's a struggle going on for India's soul, for India's direction, and I believe that India will continue the path of integration with the global south rather than looking west. I believe that India will deepen its involvement in the BRICS, in the SCO. I believe India will be a great, great power for good eventually in the not too distant future. So in this struggle for India, we must assist the good instincts that exist in India and hope that the bad instincts can be quashed, can be marginalized. Let me go to London again. Hussein Shafi, who has a question on Iran. Hussein, welcome.
My question was, do you think basically that the situation with Iran is now stabilized? Because I don't know if you heard or not, but there was a joke that went out after the so-called attack by Israel on Iran, that there were 5 people that were martyred in the attack, and the 5 people that were martyred died of laughing as they watched the attack come in, is what we were told. So with that in mind, do you think that the situation is stabilized enough now for us not to have to worry about another attack ever again, basically, on Iran by...
Well, I think, Hussein, that Iran has shown the world and certainly shown Israel that which, if they didn't know, is another intelligence failure of severe consequence, that Iran is more than capable of fighting Israel. I said here last week, a lot of people have criticized it. I believe that Iran could easily produce a nuclear warhead, may already have done so, and if I was running Iran, I definitely would already have done so. After all, Iran is confronted by multiple enemies who are all nuclear-armed states. So why should Iran, which is threatened by nuclear-armed countries, not itself obtain nuclear weapons? But they say that they don't want them. And for now, at least, that is the Iranian position. But well short of nuclear weapons, Iran has shown it has enormous sophistication in military technology, in ballistic missiles, above all. They didn't even use anything like their best ballistic missiles, and still they managed accurately to hit not 1 but 2 Israeli air bases. They may even have deliberately hit the outbuildings of Dimona, the Israeli nuclear weapons base, just to send the message, don't mess with us, don't go too far. And I think that message has been received and understood. There's only one caveat I'd make on that, is this. If Rafah were to turn into Fallujah squared, multiplied, if a gigantic massacre were to occur in Rafah, I don't believe that Iran would take that lying down. I don't believe that Iran would permit hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, mainly women and children, to be massacred in Rafah, and would take action to try and stop it. Let me go to Iran. Mohsen Farkani is in Tehran. Maybe he can shed some light. Mohsen, welcome to the show.
Hello, George. Thank you for having me here. I believe Israel's life is based on three pillars: media, psychological warfare, and America. And today, Israel, the terrorist regime, has lost all these pillars. Then my point for you is that, do you believe the Iranian drone attack on Israel will result into a deep review for GCC countries to follow their interests with Iran and more cautious with the West? Because they understand now that the security cannot be guaranteed from the West, and Iran has never been malevolent to the Arab world, but embraces them always as brothers.
Well, any GCC leader who imagines that Joe Biden is going to come to their rescue would be making a very, very serious mistake. And some of them have been stupid in the past, although they're less stupid now, I think. The rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran is of the greatest significance. Contrary to deliberately spread disinformation, Saudi Arabia did not and will not allow its airspace to be used by the Americans, still less by the Israelis, to attack Iran or Iranian interests. And I believe that countries like Kuwait, Iraq, of course, are very firmly moving into the orbit of, let's call it the BRICS SCO, the new power that is arising in the world. Anybody that thinks that the Americans will save them needs to ask that former president of Afghanistan, what was his name again? You know, the guy that left the airport with bin bags full of cash into total obscurity and powerlessness. Well, that's what America does when it decides the former puppet is no longer of any importance. Let's go to Twickenham, where Jaya Plant is on the line. This time I think about Jordan. Jaya, welcome.
Hi. So my question is about Jordan. Obviously, while most of the population of Jordan supports Palestine, their kings made it very clear to the Arab world and globally who his allegiance really lies with. I want to know what's the geostrategic importance of Jordan in the region, given this?
Well, Jordan is, of course, an entirely artificial construct. It was constructed to give a throne to the Hashemites following their disappointment in Iraq and in Saudi Arabia. It was a consolation prize. It's a wonderful country with wonderful people, some breathtaking places to visit. I know it extremely well, but it has no geostrategic importance at all. It is extremely precarious. It is partly composed of desert with a very significant piece of land which was gifted to them by Saddam Hussein, ironically, who gave Jordan, as president of Iraq, gave Jordan huge territory, on which I've traveled many times, in which there is nothing at all. But it's extremely combustible, as you point out. The vast majority of the people of Jordan are 100% with, in some cases, many cases, their actual compatriots across the River Jordan in the West Bank and in Gaza, in Palestine as a whole. Millions of them are Iraqis who are in exile from Iraq, and where Arab nationalism remains the prevailing political culture there. The king, having done some quite, photogenic things, like himself personally going up for airdrops, parachuting aid down into Gaza and so on, has severely blotted his copybook. It's virtually certain that the savage attack on Babylon, one of the most historic places, cultural treasures in the whole world, was savagely bombed by Israel last week. And it is credibly alleged that this attack was mounted using the airspace of the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. This and the land bridge of which Jordan is allegedly a part, by which traffic that can't get through the Red Sea comes by land into Israel over Jordan, the participation in several American crimes against the people of Syria, these are all adding up to a devastating indictment of the monarchy in Jordan, and no one would be surprised if that monarchy were to disappear. Andrew Detman in Hull, in England. I like a man in a hat. Go ahead, Andrew.
George, thank you very much for establishing your platform globally. I've been working on social media myself since 2013 to try to establish an interface to describe what's going on in the world today. So peace be with you. And I would like to ask a question around the spirituality of the situation on the globe at the moment. You talked earlier on about having kissed the Blarney Stone, and the man in Moscow clearly has kissed the Blarney Stone. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So we only have words. The politicians only have words. I work as a therapist. I only have words. My job is to help people move away from their own inner Armageddon and to get their behavior changed. So it's very important to be able to give a clear diagnosis and a description of what's happening in the breakdown of language, the breakdown of politics, the breakdown of goodwill, man's inhumanity to man. So when it all collapses, we say, stop, let's get some humanitarian aid in, which means that the are not exhibiting human qualities. So there are only two theocracies on this planet, really, of any note. One is Iran and one is the UK, both with established religions and both with the head of state supposedly espousing the doctrines of those religions, all of which are based on peace, Islam, or peace be with you, and Jerusalem, which means the city of peace. So this peace has to come from the inside to the outside. And so my question is based on a diagnosis that the world is ill. And it's ill because of a separation from a singularity that makes all dualities. And that the duality, the opposing forces cannot be brought together unless the one brings them together. And it is this journey to the one which makes all two, which is the problem facing mankind in order to birth humankind. And
well, look, because time is short, I'm only going to say, if there are only two theocracies in the world, Iran, and the United Kingdom. I hope the head of state in Tehran, and I believe he is very much more faithful to his religion than King Charles is to ours. Let me go to New York, where Dennis Ballantyne has a bone to pick with me. Go ahead, Dennis. You're welcome back.
Thank you, George. I don't know if I'd call it a bone to pick with you. You're a master of kind of discourse, and I think like a challenge. So when we spoke last, and I suggested that the end of Western civilization as we know it is near, you characterize that as an apocalyptic view. I don't know that I would consider my view apocalyptic. In fact, I see what's happening now as the dawning of the age of peace and prosperity, a new age of peace and prosperity. I think the Palestinians and the Ukrainians are paying the ultimate price for our salvation. You are correct in your assessment that there is no rational reason why the West can't tolerate a secular state in Palestine. But in the end, evil is not rational and does not respond to reason. Zionism is the embodiment of evil. Zionism has been exposed for what it is. There's no doubt about that, and there's no doubt that it has failed. And so, in my view, has Western civilization, or the Atlanticist imperial, the Anglo-Atlanticist imperial ethic, has been exposed for what it is. So in the same way, I see that Western civilization, as we know it today, has failed also. The real estate's going to remain. There's going to be a country in Palestine. It's just not going to be Israel. And Western civilization, the people, the geography is going to remain. It's just the ideology is going to change so radically that I think we're going to have to characterize it as something other than Western civilization, which is how we characterize it today.
Yes, indeed. Well, there's no bone to pick between us. Amen to all of that. I recall the memorable answer of Mr. Gandhi, the Indian independence leader, when asked what he thought about Western civilization, replied, yes, that would be a good idea. Last word to my good friend, Father Gelly in London. Father, there's been quite a bit of religion talked on the show today. I don't know if you want to address any of it or talk about something else, but you are most welcome to have it out with Galloway.
Thank you, George. I am a great fan of yours. I was actually contemplating coming up to Rochdale to campaign on your behalf while you were at it. And I just didn't do it because I thought I might inadvertently damage your campaign by bringing in a Christian fanatic, in inverted commas. My question observation is actually may strike you as somewhat cynical. It is not meant to, it's meant to be realistic. Namely that when we look at what is happening in Palestine, the Middle East, we seem to see an overwhelming triumph of brute force. The philosopher Thomas Hobbes, English philosopher, said treaties without the sword are just words. What he meant was that it's no good having international law, declarations, pious assertions, even moral pronouncement. At the end of the day, it is force, brute force, which rules. And in the case of the State of Israel, we see the Zionists really don't give a damn about the UN resolutions or condemnations. They know we should not be occupying West Bank, we should not have settlements, should not torment or murder civilians in Gaza. They don't give a damn because they listen only to force. Now, the only country which I know and respect love in the Middle East is Iran. Because Iran actually has done something on behalf of the Palestinian cause. So, but is it enough? Is it not the case that at the end of the day, the Zionists are so strong because they got this dumb United States, dumb Americans behind them, which give them arms. Only recently, the Congress voted a huge supply of arms to Israel. I mean, is it not the case? At the end of the day, the Zionists will crush all opposition in blood, and they do not give a damn about a moral case, an international law case, a justice case. Am I being too cynical?
So who knew that Chairman Mao was drawing on Thomas Hobbes when he said that all political power comes out the barrel of a gun? I believe that these things are only true up to a point, and they are less and less true the farther we go on in the development of human society. For this reason, once upon a time, Father, we would not have been able to have this conversation, or more importantly, nobody would be able to watch it, because we would not be allowed to have this conversation on one of the very few television channels owned by the oligarchs in hock to the power. Now we do. Now hundreds of thousands, if not millions, will see this conversation. And so soft power has become almost as important as hard power. Why? Because soft power, which affects the point of view, the viewpoint of millions of people in Western countries, will have its impact. If it decides to boycott Israel, that will have a powerful impact. Then either Israel goes bankrupt, or the governments of the West have to give Israel even more subvention than the tens of billions that they've had this year. Or the reality is that people in the West will eventually tire of their government's endless support for evil. Evil exists in the world. You and I both believe that. Satan exists in the world and within everyone. Everyone is capable of good and evil. Every society has at certain times been a force for good and a force for evil. It's a ceaseless struggle between good and evil in ourselves and in the world. The good news is, I believe, Father, that good is winning. Alas, the clock has won, and I need to wrap up this edition of Have It Out with Galloway. I personally think it's been an outstanding show. Spread it if you agree, and come back and even be on that video wall on the next edition of Have It Out with Galloway. Thanks for watching.